Good evening, good evening. Welcome to Sunday Night Magic here on the Variable Play Network. My name is Javi. Thank you very much for joining me this evening. So, another great episode lined up for you guys. It is October 3rd of 2021. Another great Sunday to talk about magic. So, today we're going to be talking about something that I think is relatively well known or already agreed upon by a lot of Commander players. But for those of you that are coming into the format of Commander EDH or even just starting into Magic, that this knowledge might be able to help you out. So I thought it would be interesting to do an episode and take a step back into fundamentals of Commander. So today we're going to be talking about the top 10 mana rocks for Commander EDH. I'm going to do my best to go through the comments through the episode for any feedback or any suggestions that you may want to throw in. I'd really appreciate that. So, wait, I'm going to need these. Yeah, no, that's not helping at all. So, let me go ahead and go through the list. This is actually going to be a pretty quick episode, I think, because there's not too many combos or explanations really built around these cards specifically, but they really are very important to deck building. So, to explain what a mana rock is, a mana rock in Magic terminology would be a artifact that produces mana, either colorless or of a specific color. So, if it is anything, if it's a permanent that can change the color of mana, they wouldn't really be considered mana rocks. Similar to the guild signets, they are often referred to as mana rocks, but in actuality, you actually need to pay one for them to take effect. So they are really to be considered as mana filters. So I'm really going to be specifically focusing on artifacts that produce mana that can significantly improve your opening or even initial turns in Commander. Obviously, if you get any mana rock maybe later in the game, they may not really serve the purpose that they're meant for anymore. They are meant to be in your opening hand or at least show up as early as possible to provide you acceleration so that you can take an advantage or a lead over your opponents in the table. So having them show up later on doesn't necessarily have any more bearing to the game. So keep that in mind because you might see several artifacts here and okay, this is my personal opinion. This is my ranking of top 10. Um don't take it as law. If you have your own ranking, if you feel that there was something that should have been included, by all means share that in the comments. And at the same time, if you feel that that these cards don't really have any significant impact later on in your game of Commander, that's perfectly fine. So this is with the initial maybe 3-4 turns in mind that I think that these play a very significant role in how you enjoy your game of Commander. So let me go ahead and get started. Number 10 is going to be, I think, probably the most expensive mana rock from all of the list. But I really also felt like I wanted to include this because it does have a lot of potential. So this is Grim Monolith. So Grim Monolith is a 2 to cast artifact, and it does not untap during your untap phase. Instead, you can actually use it to produce 3 colorless mana, and then you can pay 4 to untap it. What makes this pretty special is that the untap effect can actually be done at any time. So if it is like your opponent's turn and you don't really have any use for your mana, you can use it to untap the Grim Monolith. This made it into number 10 also because there are other artifacts that exist that are similar to it, but the fact that you're not restricted to when you can untap it and that it only costs 2 is why this is a standout from all of the other artifacts of the same type. And mind you, that if you pair this with something like Power Artifact, which reduces the activation cost of any artifact by 2, so if you reduce the untap effect of Grim Monolith by 2, it only costs 2 to untap, but it makes 3 colorless. Essentially, you will continuously net 1 colorless mana and have infinite colorless mana. So it has really great potential. Basalt Monolith is another card to contend against this, but just costing 2 for Grim Monolith actually makes it the better of the two artifacts, I think. So number 10 goes to Grim Monolith. A little hard to acquire. It hasn't been reprinted in any means, and I believe it is a reserve list card. So that's also a reason why it got bumped down to the end. I think mainly because of accessibility. It's a really good card. If you have it, good on you. You should be running this. This will help bump any game or even any turn that you're playing at least 2 or 3 turns ahead of your opponents. And it works really well with a lot of combo configurations, and so that's why it makes it the number 10. Number 9 is a very interesting cycle of mana rocks. Oh, we have a comment before we get to number 9. Hey, how old is this card? Hi, Keo. Good evening. So this is from the Urza block. So I'm going to say, the Urza block is probably the early 2000s. Like when I came back to playing Magic, that was around maybe 2005 or so, and this was already left rotation. So that tells me that this might have been released in the early 2000s. So yeah, it's the oldest of the rocks I think that we're going to be featuring here. Oh well, no, there are some other older ones, but they've been reprinted. Grim Monolith specifically has not been reprinted. So number 9 goes to a cycle of cards that I think are very important in every deck construction, and these are the Talismans. So for this example, I chose the Talisman of Creativity. So there are a total of 10 talismans, which covers every color pairing that you can think of. So that is all five colors of magic in every possible combination. So you have a talisman for every color pair. The Talisman of Creativity here, for example, costs 2. All the talismans cost 2. You can tap them to produce one colorless artifact. One colorless mana. Correction. But next is that you can produce the 2 colors that the talisman is intended to produce. So for this example, the Talisman of Creativity produces red and blue, but it deals 1 damage to you. So this is essentially an artifact form of another very important mana base in Magic the Gathering, which was known as Pain Lands, that using the lands would produce the colors you wanted at the cost of dealing 1 damage to you. So this is, I think, one of the most useful mana rocks that you can play if you are not playing a mono color. If you're playing mono red or mono blue, you actually are not allowed to play these cards because it has both mana symbols. But if you are playing more than 1 color, being for the cost of 1 life, you have 40 life. This is actually a really good tool for color fixing, getting the right colors that you need. And the fact that it can even just produce 1 colorless can also later on be used for other effects and taxes and also spell costs that you want to pay that you don't necessarily have to take damage. So number 9 goes to the Talisman of Creativity. You can pick up talismans. I believe, okay, so they came out in the Mirrodin set. I believe they also have reprints in the Modern Masters series. And the copy that you're looking here on screen is actually from the Commander 2021 pre-constructed decks. So there are really several printings of the talismans. I think at the minimum you can get at least 2 printings of the talismans, so you could get access to this. And some of them even have that whole retro brown bordered artifact version from Modern Horizons 2. So if you're into that particular aesthetic, you can also look into that. Number 8 is another favorite that does have several reprints, but it's actually for a while was actually very hard to come by. So Felwarstone is one of the original 2 to cast artifacts that produces color. The only caveat here is that it can produce 1 mana of any color that a land an opponent controls could produce. So it's actually one. If you're going first, it's terrible because your opponent hasn't played a single land. It doesn't do anything. But the moment they put down their favorite land, their command tower that makes 1 mana of any color, Felwarstone can now produce mana of any color. So it's a great turn 2 card maybe after your opponent has played their first land. It's really bad to have if you're opening and you're relying on it. But you know what? You can also maybe drop it down on first turn because you know your opponent is going to play a land. So you already are at an advantage the following turn. So this was really one of the original two color mana rocks that could produce color. Sorry, I mean two to cast mana rocks that could produce a color, but it kind of had that restriction of being dependent on your opponent. So there have been better versions, and that's why it's made it to number 8. But I run this in every deck that I have that requires mana rocks and encourage everyone to do so. Your opponents will always play lands, and they will always have a land that can maybe manipulate, filter, or change the mana that they need to a color of any kind, and thus making the Felwarstone amazing. The better version of the Felwarstone that came out actually was introduced in Throne of Eldraine when they came up with the pre-constructed Brawl decks. Every Brawl deck came with a Arcane Signet. These skyrocketed in value. Everyone wanted these cards. They're a great tool to have in any commander deck. They have thus been reprinted so many times that they are really considered to be almost at a common level that you can get in every pre-constructed at this point. And if you do not have one, I really highly suggest getting one for your commander deck. The Arcane Signet is a 2 to cast artifact similar to Felwarstone, but it adds 1 mana of any color of your commander's identity. So it is guaranteed to produce the colors you need because that's the only colors you're allowed to run. So this is great for monocolor or multicolor commander decks. I think that for a while, this was really sought after. Everyone really wanted it. And there are some naysayers or approaches in deck building that try to avoid using artifacts, and there's really nothing wrong with that. I think that if you do have a strategy or a way of playing, let's say with mono green, they have a lot of mana dorks. Red has a lot of ritual effects that don't necessarily need you to run mana rocks anymore. That's perfectly fine. I personally like running artifacts in my builds, so I always include an Arcane Signet in every deck that I've built since it's been released. Commander Legends has, I think, extended full arts of this and foil. So there's a lot. There's even a secret layer version of this. So there are a lot of different copies that you can find already in availability in the market. Shouldn't be a problem, and definitely should be something that you are running in your commander decks. So number 7 goes to Arcane Signet. Now, moving forward, we're going to be changing the casting cost of the cards that we're featuring. So the Monolith cost 2, the Talisman cost 2, Felwarstone and Arcane Signet, they all cost 2. So in terms of efficiency and starting off the game, you really want cheap mana rocks that can accelerate you and put you ahead of your opponents. So what would be cheaper than a 2 to cast mana rock? It would be a 1 to cast. And one of the very first ones, which is also a very old card but has been reprinted, is the Manifold. Manifold costs 1 and doesn't untap during its untap step, so it is very similar to Grim Monolith. It also produces 3 colorless, and it does have one caveat that you can only untap it during your upkeep by paying 4. And if you don't, if it's still tapped during your draw step, you will get 1 damage. So it's kind of a worse version of Grim Monolith in that you can't untap it whenever you want, and then it starts hurting you. But it surpasses the Grim Monolith in being such an amazing mana rock by just costing 1. On your first turn, you can play this, and on your second turn, you can already push up to 5 mana with your second land drop. That is a hell of a leap from every other player that does not run any acceleration like it. So it is something that is, there's a reason why this was restricted to 1 copy in Vintage, and there's really a reason why it's only been so rarely reprinted. It is 1 fast rock And sometimes the one damage doesn't really matter. It's worth everything it does. So, number 6 goes to Manifold. If you are able to find this, the picture I have here on screen is from the Ultimate Master set. This would be the most recent printing of it. Otherwise, you're going to have to go back to, I believe, 4th ed and maybe revised. So it it's kind of hard to pick up. I think there's a From the Vault version, if I'm not mistaken, but or even a masterpiece. But those are relatively expensive. So if you are able to find a Mana Vault, I suggest running it in your deck, unless you really have a build that costs too much life to play. Like a mono black deck, I would suggest running Manifold. But sometimes there are those decks that don't even have creatures or blockers that can take so much pain that the one damage every turn can just be aggravating to you. So it makes it into the list. I run this in just about every deck that I've built and highly encourage people to do the same. Number 6, Manifold. Number 5 is the most iconic card in all of Commander. It is it used to be a very rare card that players barely had access to, and now it's just everywhere. Anything that Wizards produces that or any Magic the Gathering product that is related to Commander already comes with a Sol Ring. There are so many modern reprints of the Sol Ring that every player should have one. I'm sure the people watching this have one. If you don't have one, it's very easy to pick up and it's one of the best tools that you can use for playing multiplayer Commander. It costs 1, so you can drop it on your first turn and it immediately produces 2 colorless. So even if you don't have a use for the colorless, on your following turn you are already up to 4 with absolutely no drawback. It is one of the most efficient mana rocks that has ever been printed. But it makes it to number 5 because there are better and more efficient rocks. I think that's my personal opinion. But there would never be any list of mana rocks that would not include this. You really should be running the Sol Ring. Unless your deck really intentionally hates artifacts, and I built one of those, I still needed to run 3 of these rocks, and Sol Ring was one of them. So it is definitely a staple in every Commander deck, in every CEDH deck that you can think of, and has so many printings that availability is never an issue. I believe that it's like $4 at this time, if not even less, because it was just recently reprinted again in 2 pre-constructed Commander decks. So if you haven't gotten one, please pick one up. Number 5, Sol Ring. All right, hey, a comment. Yes, hi Ron. Yes, you know what? I'm so sure that back when you used to play, that you used to also see Sol Rings everywhere. This card was so busted before that it was really banned into just having one per deck. So it was an R1 card. And more importantly, when Commander started, when EDH started, there was a one-on-one version that specifically banned the use of this card. That it came with pre-constructed decks, but automatically banned in one-on-one Commander, which was really unfair. I think it still is till this point. I think even Mana Vault is included in that list. That's why I'm not really a fan of dual Commander or one-on-one Commander. I love playing multiplayer, and this card is welcome in every multiplayer pod. So let's move on to the next one. What would be better than paying 1 and producing 2 colorless? Well, how about paying nothing and producing 2 colorless? The next card is the Mana Crypt. The Mana Crypt costs 0 and can be tapped to produce 2 colorless. This is essentially the upgraded Sol Ring, but with one caveat that at the beginning of your turn you have to flip a coin. If you lose the flip, so you call heads or tails, and if you lose, Mana Crypt will deal 3 damage to you. This is actually a really, really good artifact. And it might be higher in everyone else's lists. It was so hard to come by this card. This card was initially printed and included in a book. You could only get mana crypts by purchasing a book, a comic book, or a graphic novel, or I think it was a book. And actually, for a while, even the Italian version was easier to come by than the English version. But ever since they started reprinting it for Double Masters, for I believe, I think that they did it for Battle Bond also. Yeah, there's at least three different mystery boosters had them as well. So there are actually a lot of printings of Mana Crypt now that it is easier to access. It still costs a lot, but for zero and producing two mana, it's one of the fastest rocks to start every game with. But you also have to temper this or take into consideration your luck. I personally am not lucky with this thing. I have been hurt so many times by the mana crypt. I have played a game where this has taken 18 out of my 40 life. It did more damage than any opponent that I was playing against did to me. So it's something that you might have good days with it and you might have bad days. My average has always been like a 50-50 shot. So in every turn or every other turn, I'm almost bound to lose 3 life. Hopefully, if you're playing quick magic like CEDH, you don't really have to care about that. But in long games, this thing can be brutal. So you may not want to play it late game, or you might want to find a way to break it and get something out of that. So something to consider. I think that this is one of the best mana rocks that you can be running in any commander deck. Average cost of even a mono-colored commander would be at 3 or 4, which means that this will allow you to play them as early as turn 1. So the whole point of mana rocks is for acceleration. And this is probably the fastest rock I can think of. Number 4, Mana Crypt. So, going back to our examples earlier, if the Sol Ring cost 1 and made 2 colorless, this costs 0 and makes 2 colorless. What could make that possibly better? How about if the rock made colored mana and still cost 0? And that brings us to Chrome Mox. This was also originally printed in the Mirrodin set and has thus far been reprinted several times in a From the Vault version. And what you see on screen here is the Double Master version. There's even, I believe, a Invention version of this, which is a really nice looking card. So the Chrome Mox costs 0, and when it comes into the game, you will exile a card from your hand. It has to be a non-artifact, non-land card, but whatever color it was, that's the colors that the Chrome Mox can produce. Obviously, in the game of Commander, the cards that you're holding are strictly the colors that your commander allows you to play by its color identity. So anything that you stick onto the Chrome Mox will be useful for you. Now, it costs you the card. If you really need the card, if you're trying to save the card, then maybe it's not worth imprinting on the Chrome Mox. But oftentimes, when you are starting a game, the cost of your initial cards is nothing, because you should be building with draw effects. You should be building with not necessarily wheel effects, but a way to refill your hand. So if you can get ahead of other players by using a Chrome Mox, by all means, you should be running this. It costs just 1 card, and it already bumps you ahead on turn 1, and also produces a color that you would generally need in your playthrough. Luck might be a factor here, that you may not have the cards that you want or don't care about or don't want to exile to this. So take that into consideration. This one is not, well, it is a little luck based, but technically you do have a draw every turn, so you can kind of hold back until you have like a card that you don't feel you need to start the game with. Late game, It could even really be helpful also for just maybe, I don't know, fixing your hand size. I don't know if that's really a thing, but late game, if you still need the right colors of mana, it can still serve its purpose. But for now, we're taking into consideration how to start the game fast. And this is pretty good acceleration because it does provide the specific color that you need. So number three goes to Chromox. Number two is a personal favorite, and just I have a lot of really great experience using this card, and it is honestly very hard to come by. So this makes it on the list, and the reason why it is not number one is because it's a really good card, but the accessibility of it is questionable because it is a reserve list card, but it's one of the best mana rocks you'll ever find. And this is Mox Diamond. When Mox Diamond enters the game, you may discard a land card. If you do, Mox Diamond comes into the game. If you don't, you actually have to destroy or sacrifice Mox Diamond. So, in some weird situation, if you intentionally want an artifact to get destroyed or be sacrificed, you can play Mox Diamond and opt not to discard any land card from your hand. But when you start your game in Commander, if you do have one land, you're probably going to put that down. The next land that you have for the next or following turns, you can just give up the Mox Diamond and you're already ahead at 2 mana on your opening turn. And it makes any color. It doesn't even care what land you discarded. As long as you met the requirements, it now just makes any color you want. So it breaks parity in so many ways and can put you ahead. Chromox made you discard a non-artifact, non-land card, and you'll never see the card again because you put it in exile. Mox Diamond, you just have to discard a land, and most players are always going to keep a hand with at least 2 lands in it. So you have one to give up for the Mox Diamond if you're willing to make that sacrifice. And when I say you give up that card, it goes to your graveyard. It doesn't get exiled. So in Commander, there is so many recurrence and graveyard manipulation that you may be able to get that land back either way. Or sometimes you actually want something in your graveyard for delve effects or even for underworld breach effects. So it can even serve a better purpose for you by setting up your graveyard the way that you want. It has so much flexibility, and the fact that it costs 0 and can produce any color that you want makes it such an amazing tool. Fine, it doesn't produce 3, it doesn't produce 4, but it just makes 1. But any color, no restriction as to what you gave to it. So I think that if you are looking to build a very optimized deck, if you have the budget, if you even have access to this card, it is really hard to come by. There is the original printing that came out, I believe, in Stronghold. Yeah, I think it was Stronghold that originally had this, and then there is the From the Vault version. So there's only 2 printings of this card. From the Vault is really rare to find. So the price of this card is crazy. Don't look it up. This has been known to cause people to just don't even bother. Like, this might even get people to discourage from playing. But I felt that this has to be added to the list because of its sheer power. Number 2 goes to Mox Diamond. Right, let's check for some comments. All right, no comments. Cool. So we're gonna proceed. All right, so last episode we hit over an hour, so now we're only like about 30 minutes in. So this is gonna be a quick episode, I think. And if anyone has any other recommendations or suggestions of mana rocks that people should be running, I'd appreciate it if you shared it in the comments. Now we go to number 1. What would be better than making more than 1 mana? Okay, let's say 2. How about 3? And how much do you think that would cost? Maybe if it cost 2, we cover that. What if it cost 1? What if it cost 0? One of the best cards in Commander recently printed that has warped the game, especially for opening turns, in terms of acceleration. Number one goes to Jeweled Lotus. This is the Black Lotus for Commander. This card can still be picked up around the price of, I think, an average of about $100. So it's not that crazy expensive yet. But it costs zero, and you can tap and sacrifice Jeweled Lotus. So it's a one use card. But you add 3 mana of any one color and spend this to cast only your commander. You always have a commander. You're guaranteed to have it. So having this in your opening turn with your first land drop can accelerate you up to 4 mana. It is a Black Lotus, with the restriction of only being for your commander, which is fair enough. I think it keeps it balanced. Getting this later in the game is nothing great, unless your commander's died a few times, and so it can definitely help you recast your commander. But I've had opening turns with this card that has produced some of the best and fastest board states I've ever built. If you have a commander, let's say that costs 3, if you're running mono green, it's down on turn 1. You can already begin your plan almost immediately. I was running a Najila deck that pretty much she cost 1 red and 2 colorless. With this down on turn 1, Najila's in. And you have a 3/2 first strike that starts building an army immediately. Think of the potential of putting down your commander on turn 1. For my personal deck that uses Tibna the Weaver, I usually sacrifice the Jewel Lotus for 3 black mana and play a land that produces white. And that's it. I got Timna and 1 excess mana that I don't even care about. Or if you put it in combination with any of the other rocks that we've shown here, that you can pull off something really fast on turn 1 with the use of Jewel Lotus. Again, the caveat that I put in here when we started the list is that the whole purpose of these is that they produce mana, and that if they were in your opening hand, or at least in the early part of the game, turn 2, turn 3, if you pick up or just draw Jewel Lotus from the top of your deck, you're golden. You can begin your plan immediately. So it is the most efficient for costing 0, producing 3, albeit that you only get a one-time use, but it should be more than enough to already put you in the lead over all of your opponents. It is by far, I think, one of the best mana rocks that has been produced for Commander, and will probably be one of the reasons why the set for Commander Legends continues getting reprints or demands for it, or will even continue or spawn the next Commander Legends set. I believe the next Commander Legends is actually already been announced for 2022 in the previous episode that we covered. So there is really going to be a lot of ways that this can be reintroduced so people can get additional printings. But mind you, there are normal versions, there are foil versions, there are extended versions, and even extended foil. They all came from Commander Legends because this was just printed last year. But pretty much you already have 4 different variants of this card circulating the market. One reprint of this, and the price might level out to something manageable. But if you are building a commander and are looking for quick acceleration, I highly suggest picking up a copy of this if you are capable of doing so. I don't recommend spending beyond your means, but this is something that is readily available to you because it just came out recently. The price is, of course, something that you really have to ask yourself if it's worth it. I personally have only gotten 1 copy of this because I didn't feel that I needed any more than that for the decks that I'm building. Instead, I just rotate it with my builds and even run a proxy so that I don't have to keep moving the sleeves around. But just having one of these is, I think, a great tool for any commander deck. Unless you are running a very cheap commander, let's say that they only cost one, then you probably don't need a dual Lotus. But if you have a commander that costs anywhere between 3, 4, or even 5, this can accelerate your turns to have your commander out as early as turn 1 or turn 2, and would be remiss not to recommend it. So number one mana rock for commander and EDH goes to Jewel Lotus. So that brings my list to a close. Thank you everyone for joining me for my top 10 mana rocks for Commander and EDH. Thank you for those who dropped by the show, who left a like and comment. I really appreciate your feedback. And if you do have suggestions for what other lists or you'd like me to cover for the next episodes, please let me know. And also, just as an update for everyone that has been tuning in and following Sunday Night Magic, we may be having a little bit of a gap between the episodes. As you can see behind me, I am currently in the process of relocating, so I may not be able to complete or continue to do some of the episodes while I'm moving. The members of the Variable Play Network may be filling in my place to produce and deliver some content for you all. But so in the meantime, look out for updates, and thank you again, everyone, for watching. Have a great evening.